Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Research Talks Qualitative Conversations. Today, we are honored to have with us Christina Silver, who she'll say more about her background and experience in a moment, which is rather impressive. We've had to work parallel with each other in lots of ways for a very long time, and we're really excited that she's joining our team as a qualitative scholar this summer for our Qualitative Research Summer Intensive, offering a 2-day course titled Integrating AI into Qualitative Research Appropriately. We talk at ResearchTalk about how sometimes not everybody reads the full title, and in this case, hang with this one till the end because that last word, as Christina talks, you'll see, is really the powerful piece of her unique contribution on this topic. The course is July 27th and 28th in our first cycle of classes. So I'm president of ResearchTalk. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary in just a few days on April 1st. Time goes quickly. So I'm a sociologist in my own work. I study personal relationships, but I also like Christina and Paul and Jeff, we benefit from just the advice we give to folks. And it's so exciting when we get people studying things we never have the agenda ourselves to study, and they just catch us up to speed on so much. It's a real gift of what we do for a living, so it's beautiful. So what I want to do is very quickly ask my colleagues to introduce themselves, and then we'll have Christina do a short introduction before we move into our conversation. So Jeff, do you want to start us off today?
Thanks, Ray. I'm Jeff Petruzzelli. I've been with ResearchTalk since 2001 as a qualitative research specialist.
Thank you, Jeff.
I'm Paul Mijas. I'm a qualitative researcher and consultant at the Odum Institute at UNC Chapel Hill. And I'll also be teaching or co-teaching a course on coding and analysis this summer at QRSI with Karen Campbell.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Paul. Christina.
Yeah, hi. So it's great to be here, first of all. Thanks a lot for the invitation. I love talking about these topics, so looking forward to it. So I'm Christina Silver. I've kind of got two parts to my working life. I run the Cactus Networking Project at the University of Surrey in Guildford, which is all about computer-assisted qualitative data analysis. And for many, many years, since 1994, we've been raising awareness and building capacity in the use of a whole range of different digital tools for qualitative analysis. So I run that project now, but I've also got my own consultancy business where I do lots of research and analysis and training and bits and pieces. And I'm really interested in the relationship between methods and technology. And so what's happening at the moment in the AI space is very much related to that, of course.
Lots of energy, we'll say.
Indeed.
Yeah. We were thinking about the event, all these kinds of things. And when we walk through the 18 classes we offer, for people who are attending, there's lots of choices they have to make. They can come 2 days, they can come a day, and many choose a couple of days. But each round of courses, that when you're teaching, there are actually 4 different courses folks can choose from. So we put the classes into categories. And yours is in a category this year we call Refining Your Qualitative Lens. So we thought it was a particularly nice umbrella topic for today's conversation. And we're just wondering if you could talk to us about ways you see your course content potentially refining someone's qualitative lens.
Yeah, sure. I think that's a really nice way of putting it, actually. So my course is all about the role of AI, not only generative AI. We're going to be talking about more traditional forms of AI as well. And that really, I think, encourages us to sort of reconsider the epistemological underpinnings of our qualitative work. So for me, the appropriate use of any tool, whether it's AI or anything else, I think what that looks like is different across the methodological spectrum. So if we think about sort of purist approaches sitting in the, very strongly in the interpretivist, constructivist spaces, then they prize reflexivity and they think about harnessing AI quite differently from if you're looking at a large volume of qualitative material coming from a more positive, post-positive tradition, for example. So through the thinking of tools, we can discuss the kind of philosophical underpinnings of what qualitative research means. And I think that's one of the ways that I find it really interesting to think about the relationship between tools and methods. So I think that's the first thing that I would say. So we'll be opening up that kind of epistemological discussion through thinking about the appropriateness of tools. And I think that very much relates to what interpretation is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think one of the things that's going on at the moment in the space when we consider AI is what is interpretation and who or what can do it. So historically, qualitative inquiry has all been about, you know, the human being the one that does the interpretation. And now we've got tools that purport to be able to do something similar to interpretation. And so I like to have a conversation about what is interpretation and can an AI do it or not? And if it can, is that the same as what we do as humans? And so that's kind of very much related to that philosophical piece, but from a kind of more practical perspective. So kind of, you know, thinking when we think about the qualitative lens, I think, you know, fundamentally where we're coming from in why we choose qualitative methods is really important to consider, but the way that the tools are allowing us to think about that in a slightly different way, maybe. There's lots of discussion, isn't there, about, you know, whether if you use AI, does that suppress our critical thinking? Does that kind of flatten things out? Or can we actually harness AI to help foster that in us? So it's those kinds of discussions that I think can be really powerfully had through the use of AI tools. And that kind of brings into kind of not into question, but into focus, you know, what do we actually mean when we say that we're doing qualitative inquiry? Because I think that means quite a lot of different things to different people.
Right. I
Yeah.
love the idea of bringing people's backgrounds, regardless of how aware they are of those backgrounds. Some people are absolutely, they wear it on their sleeve, and other people don't necessarily realize that the kind of collective of their thought really indicates, hey, this is kind of a posture, a disposition you have. And we have lots of folks when they talk about AI say it doesn't fit with who I am as a qualitative specialist. So they choose to just kind of, you know, do their work and proceed. But is that really possible? Because isn't the other side, if you're not going to use it, people are consuming it. Sometimes they may not even know. So I was just wondering, kind of on that side of being a consumer of work that's involved AI, any thoughts or advice for people kind of who might think, let me just kind of put the AI stuff off on someone else's table and I don't have to think about it?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think we do have a choice. And I think the choices we make, you know, we can make different choices at different times. So that's the first thing that I would say. But I think as long as you're making an informed choice, then I would say the choice not to use AI is just as valid as the choice to use AI, as long as it's an informed choice. But your point about consuming, you know, one
Yeah.
of the things that worries me most about the AI space at the moment is what I've written about previously and called it qualitative deepfake. So the
Mm.
idea that it's now possible to do a qualitative project right from the get-go, right until the end, using AI with maybe minimal or even no human intervention. And that's what's scary for me, is like how do we know if and when that's happening, and what does that mean for quality, and what does that mean for accountability? So I think if you actively choose not to use AI, and I think there are valid reasons to make that choice, but if you're actively choosing not to use AI in your own qualitative inquiry, not only does that mean that other people are not, but it also means that you don't know, like you say, we don't necessarily know who has and who hasn't and when and why, because there's a real lack of guidelines at the moment. And there's also a lack of transparency, because, you know, I've come across quite a lot of researchers who are using it but aren't talking about it because they're worried about what other people will say. And I think that's a real shame, because I think, you know, as a community of practice, we need to discuss this because it is a controversial issue. But we can only kind of together grapple with what it really means for our profession by being transparent about what's happening. And I think that's something that I hope to see more of in the future.
Yeah. And this is a conversation too, when you talked about the Cactus Network and how you all started working in that 1994. That was a time with qualitative software where this talk about transparency of the use of the tool, this is not a new conversation for our
No,
field by any means, right? So we've been
absolutely.
talking
No,
about this for a
absolutely. I
long
think what's
time.
happening now, the conversation is mirroring that conversation, and
Yeah.
you remember that conversation as
Hmm.
well. I was just beginning my qualitative career at that time, but
Yeah.
there were all of those discussions about, oh, if you use the early versions of the ethnograph or Atlas TI and whatever, it's all homogenizing
Yes.
methods. And,
Right.
I never really ascribed to that view.
Right.
But I think it's more pertinent now with AI than maybe it was then. But I definitely think there's definitely a mirroring in that debate, isn't there?
Yeah. Just for our listeners' benefit, Christina, you mentioned your article. We'll be back and forth with Christina when we finish, and we'll have just, you can recommend references you think people might be interested in. And for people listening, in the description section on the video on YouTube, you'll see a list of recommendations for that. I had one follow up before we move to the next question. You had mentioned something that everybody may not be as aware of. So if you could just give a short idea, you compared generative AI to more traditional ways, and maybe just a sentence about. I think people are now aware with generative AI, but just in case, one more sentence about each so people get a better feel for what you're
Yeah,
about.
sure. So these days, I think when people say AI, they tend to mean generative AI. So that's the kind of AI that leans or derives from large language models. So back in it was November 2022, wasn't it, that ChatGPT was released by OpenAI, and then those commercial large language models became available for people to use, and the tools that come from those are generative AI. So using large language models, we can ask a question and the model will generate a response. Um, but that's just one form of AI. So I mentioned traditional AI, which is a term that's sometimes used now to differentiate the AI that happened before that. So things like machine learning, supervised and unsupervised machine learning, some forms of sort of natural language processing, that kind of thing are forms of AI, but they're not generating something new in the same way that we have from the large language models.
Yeah.
But some of those traditional forms of AI we've had in software like NVivo and such for a long time, actually.
Yeah.
Sentiment analysis, for example.
Right. Yeah. And we've had them in our world and work we do
Indeed,
every day that may or may not be on a research project. Yeah.
indeed.
So in your course, again, we were emphasizing earlier the word appropriately, and it ties to this question. When we think about the course in particular, how do you see that your course will help people feel ready to move forward with their work after experiencing 2 days of enriched conversation with you?
Yeah, so I think that's when I think about that, I think about that as a kind of funnel. So we're going to start off talking about the broad landscape. So the questions that we've just been talking about, Ray, what is AI? What are the different forms of AI? What's the landscape of AI? And I think it's really important to be able to understand what's happening now, to see that in a historical context. So there's a little bit of history about how we got to this position over the last few decades, and then what's happening now in the space. And so that talks about different genres of tools, different types of tools. So generative AI tools which have been designed for qualitative inquiry, and those that haven't, but that can still be used. So kind of mapping the landscape initially on a kind of broad level.
Mm.
Um, but mainly, though, the course is about thinking about considering the priorities that we have in a given project, and using those to drive what we then consider to be appropriate use of AI. And so that's sort of in methodological terms and practical terms as well. So thinking methodologically about the kind of data you're working with, what the analytic method is that we're using, and then how the AI can help or not in those different cases, but then also practical things in terms of, whether you're working in a team or as an individual researcher, how much time you've got, what the kind of outcome requirements are for the project, all of those sorts of things. So sort of coming down from that broad landscape and thinking, okay, what does that mean concretely in my context? And as I said earlier, that might also include deciding not to use certain tools for certain stages in a project or certain projects themselves. So certainly myself, I wouldn't always use any tool in the same way for each individual project. So we're going to be talking about that. So that's the kind of broad grounding, I guess. In terms of immediate, I think you talked about immediate takeaways when we were discussing this, and for me, that's to do with the workflow. So I don't know if you agree, Ray, but each qualitative project I do is different from the one before, right? In terms of exactly the stages I go through and how I iterate backwards and forwards between different things. And so in this course, I really want to talk about when tools might be appropriate at different stages in a workflow and how that might look different at different times, so that we're kind of in the position to make some informed decisions about that.
One of the things, Christina, that this brings up for me, and Paul, you've had lots of experience too. For those listening, Paul and I both have extensive experience teaching qualitative software. Jeff's been involved in that too. But not just related to software. In so many of our courses, people come with this kind of just tunneled idea of, I'm going to take a course about this topic and it's about data generation, as Elaine Keane calls data collection, kind of an interesting twist. And they think, oh, good, she's going to tell me everything I do next time I do a dyadic interview. And they're kind of just so geared, and they just think, oh, just give me the step-by-step and then I'll be okay. But this is a very different, more useful way to think about how you do work. It really, you drive so much of your engagement with the people you do in your consultancy, with your conversation work you do related to Cactus, always with, it's about decision making and thinking through how and why and implications of different decisions. It's what we've always focused our attention to. But that's really a critical piece. And it's, again, getting to this user-consumer difference for folks who are kind of, maybe dismissive, maybe too strong a word, but it's really important to think about, how do you decide what level of knowledge you have about AI, if you're not going to use it, what you do when. But all those pieces are very thoughtfully put together, I think, in an elegant way, whether it's kind of our conversations or what we see and how you've organized the course, or just watching your engagement on LinkedIn, which is always fun. I always like when I see Christina Silver's name up there. But yeah, so that's kind of, I think that's important, Paul, right? When we think about moving forward with integrating something that is effectively a tool, that we really want to think about, wait, how do I use this? The answer is at the decision-making level rather than simply the click, click, click. Yeah. And there's a question, Paul, that you've had in mind that is, Christina gives a segue to the next topic that we wanted to hear your thoughts about. So let me give that to Paul. And yeah.
Right. So Christina, I'm wondering how your experience teaching tools for qualitative inquiry have affected your strategies for teaching, presenting AI. In other words, how has teaching, what have you learned from teaching tools in regard to presenting AI?
So I think very, very early on, I learned from teaching that learners have different needs and different expectations from their tools. And I think that made me realize very quickly that there is no recipe, right? So when I first, in fact, Anne Lewins and I, who I worked with for a long time at the Cactus Networking Project, we've just finished the 3rd edition of one of our books. It's just gone into the publishers. And we were talking about our early teachings together. So she kind of mentored me. And I remember at the beginning, I had like a script, and I hardly gave any time for questions because I was really worried that somebody would ask me a question that I didn't know the answer to. So I had this very carefully crafted script when I took everybody through step by step, press this button, this will happen, and then this will happen. And I was really worried because I wasn't a very confident teacher. to be asked questions I didn't know the answer to. So I, designed it so that that was less likely to happen. These days, many years later, I love questions I don't know the answer to, because that gives me the opportunity to, together with the learners, to troubleshoot and work it out. And that really, I think pedagogically, I've realized over the years that there is not only is there no one recipe of using any tool or indeed any method. I believe it's the same with methods as well as tools, but also the way that you enact your methods through your tools is partly a personal preference thing. And so what I love a lot about software, qualitative software tools, is that you can get to the same point in a number of different ways often. And I say to my students now, as long as you get to where you're going in the end, then, if you're not going the most efficient way, then that doesn't matter so much.
Yes.
It's a bit like going on a journey, isn't it? Sometimes you need to go straight to where you're going as quickly as possible, and other times you might take the scenic route, or, but as long as you get there at the time you need to get there. So I think I learned that through becoming more confident in taking questions I didn't know the answer to. That opened my mind more and more to the fact that there is no one answer. Mm-hmm. And I think with AI, that really, is even more important, that kind of way of thinking about tools and methods, because I don't see AI as a kind of silver bullet. I think it's appropriate for some things and not for others. And, in some contexts, it might be, really changing the way people are working, but that's not happening across the board. And so I think my experience of becoming more of a confident teacher has also allowed me to become more confident in understanding what the purpose of methods and tools are, which is to accomplish good quality research. And how we get there, the methods scaffold that and the tools enable it. But at the end of the day, we are the ones who are operating the tools and choosing the methods. And that's why that whole decision making piece that you referred to earlier, I think is so important. So, if you come to one of my courses, you're not going to get a recipe. You're going to get a framework of things to think about and decisions to make. And often people go away with more questions than they come to the course with, which sounds quite scary at the beginning. But actually, I think it's a really good thing, because then you learn what you need to know more about.
Mm-hmm. And those questions are great too, because they're of a totally different nature than the questions they came in with, and a lot of them are specific to what they're going to do in their own project, in their own steps at different points in their project. You used an expression earlier which I loved, where you were saying you're going to map the landscape with people of what's available in AI, things of that sort. But this is another map the landscape piece that you're addressing, is mapping the landscape of strategies and choices and what, when, and all those kinds of things. Yeah, it's fabulous. Paul, anything this conversation inspires you, you're curious about? Anything more?
All right, not at the moment.
We're going to shift gears, and before we do that, I want to check in with Jeff to see, Jeff, if there's anything else on your mind before.
I just found it interesting what you were just talking about, Christina. I know we said this earlier, but it really does mirror the discussion of qualitative software. We have found that a lot of times the software kind of takes over the analysis, in that what do I do when, what do I click here, how do I do this, and that kind of becomes all consuming. And I think that's probably one of the dangers with AI as well, just kind of not getting caught in the how-to and the step-by-step and what do I press when, what do I do now, and it's more just kind of just going with that process. So just am I correct to kind of see it that way?
Yeah, that's exactly how I see it. And I think that that strategies piece is even more important, because the AI, I do believe the AI can take over more now than when the software first, because for a long time software didn't actually do anything. It was just holding what we were doing, whereas now the AI is able to do stuff. And so therefore, that's why all of the strategies level decision-making thinking is actually even more important now. I think that's what you're reflecting, Jeff. Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
And right in that strategy realm, Christina, we're wondering, are there types of qualitative inquiry or particular analytic tasks that you wouldn't use AI for?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. So, if we believe that there's no one size fits all recipe,
Uh,
then therefore I believe, stemming from that principle is the idea that I would use AI differently for one project than another project. And so let me give you an example to bring it up in terms of how that relates to the nature of the project. If I was doing a literature review, there's lots and lots of discussion at the moment about, and lots of new tools for using AI for literature reviewing. Not all of them are very useful, but nevertheless, um, if I was doing a literature review in a field or a topic that I knew really well already, then I would use AI to help me review new literature which was coming into that space very differently than if I was doing a project on a topic that I didn't know very well. Because if I know the field very well already, I know the kinds of questions that make sense to ask of those new articles that have been published in the last 6 months that I haven't read yet. Whereas if it's a new topic that I'm not familiar with, I call it the sort of accumulation of knowledge that I've gathered over the years of engaging in whatever the topic is. It's just sort of there latently in my brain that I can kind of draw upon when I'm using AI to help me familiarize with or analyze some new literature that's been published. But if it's a new area that I'm not very familiar with, I haven't got all of that accumulation of knowledge. I don't know what the good questions are to ask. I need to read and think about those materials in depth. So I think literature reviewing is a really good example of if you rush into using AI, not only without planning, but without understanding what you're losing by using AI as well as what you might be gaining, then I think that's when it becomes dangerous. Because I think, with any tool, you can lose something as well as gain something. So a lot of the discussion at the moment is, I want to do things quicker or I want to do things better. But, if you don't read the whole of the article yourself and you're just picking out little bits that the AI tells you is the important stuff, you don't have that whole understanding of the argument that's crafted in a piece of literature or whatever. So I think for me, that's a really nice example of, why I say I would use AI differently for one project for another project. It's partly to do with what the topic is, as well as what the method might be or how much data I've got and so on. So I could take those examples for all of those other things as well. But I think the literature one's a really good example. If I haven't got very much time and there's 10 articles that's been published, I know what the questions are. I know what I need to know from those articles because I've spent the last 20 years thinking about it. Whereas if it's a new topic, I haven't got any of that, so I need to read it.
So it's far more than a simple yes, no, issue. I love the context you gave. What I love about that example is, again, it's this parallel back when people were thinking about software. One of the things we noticed a lot is as people use software, they lost their active mind. And an example is there were folks we worked with before they started using software. We would watch them review a transcript or review field notes or review documents they were reviewing, where if they were, say, doing policy research, and their minds would be so active. And they did a lot of memoing and they created conversations about what they were doing while they were working. And then when people started using the tool, we had an expression we would use when the three of us would co-teach called, like, they closed their memo mind and they stop reflecting. And that's one of the things I worry about is AI is not an invitation to introduce a more passive mind. And the way you framed the example with literature is it really is like keep your mind active, be critical, not just critical of what it gives you back, and you can talk back to it. I notice when I use AI for stuff where if it says something and I know it's kind of out of place, so still having the knowledge, I'll say, wow, that was kind of an off-base comment, wasn't it? And then it reacts, it's like, oops. And so it does kind of, it responds even kind of to kind of humorous criticism and stuff. But this notion of looking for an opportunity, I think you're so right on with people want to do things and let me speed up my work, but also it is tempting. It can kind of lull people into thinking about, oh, my mind's so like tired, and I can kind of relax and like be careful with that.
But some things warrant being sped up, but others don't.
Yeah,
Is how I think about it. So that's another one of that framework of the kind of considerations that we would talk about when we're thinking about AI. It's some things I'm really good at and I really enjoy. Other things I know I'm not so good at that maybe the AI is good at. So I think
yeah,
there's lots of moving plates, aren't there? It's like what am I good at and what is the AI good at? What do I actually enjoy doing? So there's quite a lot of discussion at the moment, isn't there, about do we still need to code now that we've got AI? And and a lot of the discourses around that is that are to do with coding. Nobody likes coding. Coding's really boring. And actually I quite enjoy coding. And because I find that to be an analytically interesting task to do, and I'm not ready to give up coding just because I could do something in a different way. So I think there's lots and lots of things to take into consideration in making those choices about whether and how to use any tool that but particularly AI.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's interesting too when we in the sort and sift think and shift analytic method at Research Talks Design, we talk about topic monitoring, which is a much more active form of coding. And again, it's kind of keeping your mind invested. And I love that this is kind of a theme that's kind of through your conversation today. When you think going back to starting to use tools for qualitative inquiry and now bringing AI into that, what's been challenging to you then now, kind of maybe the evolution, but what's been challenging for you in thinking through integrating tools into qualitative inquiry?
So I think when I first started using software back in the day, it was all to do with keeping a record of what I'd done. For what purpose and to what end. So some qualitative software programs have a kind of technical audit trail, don't they, when they will remember which button you pressed and you've got an order, a list of what you've done, but they never remember why you did it or whether it was a useful thing to do or those sorts of things. And so keeping track in a research diary or I call it my research process journal. So keeping, not just I did this, then I did this, but why I did it and what the outcome was and how that helps me iterate and deviate from my plan or whatever it might be. I found that quite challenging when I first started using software because I had to do that. Not only did I have to do it myself, but I had to continually keep that up to date. And sometimes it felt like, oh, I'm spending all my time writing what I'm doing rather than actually doing it. And I found that quite challenging in the beginning until I realized how important it was. So when I wrote up my methodology for my master's dissertation or my PhD, I realized very quickly how useful it is if you keep that up to date as you create it, because retrospectively trying to remember what you did is very difficult. So I think that's something that I learned. I'm very, I'm much better now and very keen to document everything now, for that reason. And I think that's something that I miss in some of the AI tools at the moment. So some of the new AI, generative AI driven tools, which are new on the scene, they don't have very much or any sort of note-taking, memoing capabilities in them yet. I expect and hope that will come in the future, but they're all, at the moment, they're very focused on the analysis side of things. But I guess you'd agree with me that, analysis isn't only what you're doing with the data, it's also what you're thinking. And you know, I realize more and more the older I get that if I don't write down what I'm thinking, then I've forgotten it very quickly.
Yeah.
And so that's not just about methods, but also analytic audit trails, you know, all of those interpretations that you have. And so, you know, I'm looking forward to when the new AI tools start to see how valuable that side of it is as well.
Yeah. And it's great at keeping the mindedness and prioritization on reflection while you're working. It keeps at the forefront. Don't use tools for qualitative, especially within all periods of inquiry, but an analysis just to expedite what you're doing. And we want to keep this kind of real focus on the process, not just the product. And so many people are like, I gotta give this to my boss. I have to get this out. I have to get this published. And but the process, it's sort of like the way you talked about coding. It's fun, enjoy. So it's kind of a great way to think through. So we're gonna close just with kind of a little bit more thinking about qualitative inquiry in general. And we were wondering, when you again think back about your qualitative research work over the course of your career, what's something you wish someone told you when you first started doing qual research?
Yeah, so planning.
No hesitation.
So I think I learned the hard way how important planning is. And I see it all the time in my students now. People just want to get into the software and start. And I just want to get in and start coding, or I just want to get in and start analyzing. And the number of times people have said to me, oh, I've done all my coding, what next? And in my head, I'm thinking, you should have thought about that before we started coding. But then we have to have a conversation about, okay, I've got lots and lots of codes, and what do I, that's a classic example. And it's slightly a tension, isn't it, or a balance, because we know, those of us that have done lots and lots of qualitative research, that the plan changes. So qualitative inquiry is iterative and emergent, isn't it? So we're kind of repeatedly going over and over and over and doing things again and again, and kind of we don't know what path we're going. That the sum is more than the parts, and so for that reason, I think not only have we historically sometimes been criticised for that kind of flexibility, but that also makes it quite difficult to plan, because we don't know exactly what's going to happen. So I think what I've learned and how I incorporate that learning in my teaching now is, just because your plan almost certainly will change doesn't mean you don't need a plan. So you have a plan, and you make that plan in such a way that it's flexible enough to change. Right. But if you don't have a plan at all, it's a bit like, these days we could just get in the car, can't we, and go to meet someone, not even knowing where we're going, because it's all on our phone, whereas back in the day we used to have to look at a physical map and decide, which route we were going to take to get there. And I think that's a nice little analogy. It's like you need to have some sense of where you're going, even if you don't know exactly how you're going to get there. And I think that's something that, I don't know, probably I was told to plan, but probably I just didn't take the advice. So
right, exactly. And I love the reference to plan, even though plans adjust and move. And to me, that's excitement when you realize that, because it's not simply what to do when. It's usually you discovered something you could not have known at the onset. So the reflection again is note what was happening, what the discovery was, and it's not simply do things differently. It's here's a finding, here's an idea. So it's such an important piece. I'm glad that you're putting that out for people. It's a strong benefit for taking the time to listen to us chatting and thinking aloud today. Jeff, you were also thinking about another question for Christina.
Yeah, I think this has kind of been woven throughout your discussion today, but we just would like to hear you talk a little bit about what keeps you committed to qualitative inquiry, what keeps you going in this field.
Well, the main thing is the people I come in contact with. They keep me excited and engaged and make it worthwhile. And related to that, I guess, is the learning I do through my teaching. So I don't see myself as the font of all knowledge. I see myself as a facilitator rather than a teacher or an instructor, I guess, because I think I learn a lot in every teaching encounter, and I love that. So I alluded to it earlier, nowadays I like a question I don't know the answer to, because I think it's fun to work out the answer together. But also that's what helps me broaden my own understanding, and I see myself very much as kind of actively learning all the time. And so I remember when we were talking a little bit about AI today, but when AI first came out, first of all I was kind of like, oh no, I've got even more to learn, and it's very overwhelming, and the continual keeping up to date is much harder and much more onerous than it's ever been, because it's so fast paced and there's so much of it. But that's actually what keeps me excited. I love that side of it. So it's very much the people I come in contact with that foster that enjoyment. So I love the methods, and I love tools, and I particularly love thinking about how I can enact methods through tools, but I love discussing that with people. And I'm really lucky to have met thousands and thousands of researchers working in all kinds of different disciplines and countries over the years. And so my own kind of methodological and disciplinary kind of mind is continually expanded by all of those people that I meet. And now that so much is on Zoom, and you can be in touch with people that you probably never would have met before if we didn't have these platforms. I think that's really exciting. That's what keeps me going, keeps me thinking, it's never the same. It's a bit like qualitative inquiry, isn't it?
Yeah.
What keeps you excited in it is because you don't know what's going to happen, and that flexibility. And I think that's the same with my teaching, is that every teaching session is different, and I really enjoy that.
Yeah, it's fabulous. So just to close us out today, the kind of a broad question is, why qualitative inquiry in 2026?
So I think in the age of AI, qualitative inquiry is more important than it ever has been before, partly because there's this kind of idea, because of large language models, that kind of anybody can do it. And I think that was a risk that many qualitative researchers were really worried about when generative AI first came out, is that we will, sort of, what does this mean for our profession? But I actually think that we are, because of our qualitative training and what qualitative inquiry means, I think we're very well placed to observe and understand what's happening in the world right now. And in methods, I think there's a schism. I think there's the advocates who are really, really keen on AI, and then there's a lot of skeptics who are worried about it. And I think as qualitative researchers, we're really well placed through our kind of training to listen, which is essentially what we are, right? We're listeners, we're observers, and we're listeners, and we bring that together and use those observation and listening and analysis, interpretive capabilities that we have to understand the world. And I think, given, not just because of AI, but given everything else that's going on in the world at the moment, we're living in a very kind of fractured and fast changing world. And I think, for all of those reasons, understanding the meanings of what's going on and how humans experience what's happening in the world is really, really important. And so I think it's an exciting time to be a qualitative researcher, actually.
That's a beautiful spin. It's great. Make us all feel better about our own little corner of this world. It's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's great having an opportunity just to catch up like this. We look forward to our continued interactions, and we'll have more information about how to find detail about the course, things like Christina's bio. And as I said in the description, we'll have a little bit of, some resources that she'll suggest that you might find interesting. So thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Paul. And especially thank you, Christina. So we're coming up on the top of hour. So let's go ahead and close our conversation now. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.